Story 1.
The Possession of Robert Mannheim. In 1949, in the quiet town of Mount Rainier, Maryland, in the United States, a 14-year-old teenager named Robert Mannheim innocently played with a Ouija board he had received from his beloved aunt. What began as curious fun would soon become the most documented possession case in American history. After the sudden death of his aunt, under mysterious circumstances, Robert began to display behaviors that chilled the blood of his family in the otherwise peaceful Maryland community. Heavy objects flew through the house without logical explanation. Century-old furniture moved on its own during the night, and the boy spoke fluently in languages he had never even heard before. His desperate family watched helplessly as their beloved son transformed into something unrecognizable, with a supernatural strength that should not exist in such a young and fragile body. Neighbors began whispering about the screams that echoed through the streets during the darkest nights. What most disturbed the family was the boy's radical personality shift. During the day, Robert remained normal, playing and chatting like any other teenager, but at nightfall, a sinister transformation overtook him. His eyes turned completely black, his voice became deep and raspy, and he demonstrated knowledge of historical events he had never studied. The temperature in the house would drop drastically whenever the episodes began, forming a layer of ice on the windows, even during Maryland's hottest summer days. Religious objects were found broken or upside down in the morning, and family photographs appeared torn or burned without any plausible explanation. But what truly terrified everyone was when Robert began speaking in the exact voice of his dead aunt, revealing intimate family secrets that only she could have known. Private conversations, decades-old memories, even bank account passwords that had never been shared. How could a spirit possess such specific and personal information? The most renowned doctors in Baltimore could find no logical explanations for the boy's extraordinary strength or for the red marks that appeared spontaneously on his skin during the most intense episodes. During one particularly disturbing medical consultation, Robert, still speaking with his deceased aunt's voice, began recounting intimate details about the doctor's own childhood, including traumas he had never shared with anyone. The specialist, Dr. Herman, a lifelong skeptic, was completely shaken when the boy mentioned the name of his twin brother, who had died at birth, a secret the family had guarded for decades. The physical manifestations intensified. Words in ancient Aramaic appeared carved into Robert's skin during the night. Wounds bled without apparent cause, and an invisible force frequently hurled him against the walls with enough violence to leave dents in the plaster. During exorcism sessions that stretched on for agonizing months, the region's most experienced priests witnessed horrors that defied any rational description. Robert would levitate fully above the bed for endless minutes, his young body twisting into anatomically impossible angles, while a guttural, inhuman voice emerged from his throat, pronouncing blasphemies in archaic Latin that even the most erudite scholars could not fully translate.
Aeternam tormenta paravi vobis, maledictus sis in terra, sis in miseria semper, vae tibi quia ego sum dominus tus nunc, non timeas me sed timeas potestatem quam habeo.
The priest's detailed and meticulous notes documented every terrifying moment, every word spoken by the entity, creating what the Catholic Church still considers the most complete and convincing account of demonic possession ever recorded in modern history. During one particularly intense session, Father Hughes witnessed Robert speaking simultaneously in 4 different languages: Latin, Ancient Greek, Hebrew, and a tongue that linguists later identified as archaic Sumerian.
In illo tempore ego sum qui fui, qui sum et qui erit, ego imi o archeos demon, eniva harva hatich, ana الروح القديمة, ana الذي كنت وأنا الذي سيكون.
The boy vividly described medieval tortures that had occurred centuries before his birth, naming executioners and victims with chilling historical precision. At one point, the entity possessing Robert revealed confessional secrets that Father Hughes himself had received years earlier, information that should have been known only to God. The marks appearing on the boy's skin formed words in dead languages, sometimes prophesying events that later became reality with frightening accuracy. This real, documented case remains one of the most disturbing mysteries ever investigated by both medicine and the church. But witnesses affirm that the truth was even more visceral and terrifying than any later account. Robert was eventually freed after months of torment, but the psychological and spiritual scars remained forever etched into his soul. For those courageous enough to witness these supernatural events in small-town Maryland, a dark and undeniable truth became crystal clear. Not everyone rests in peace. Decades after the exorcism, Robert was never the same again. He developed an extreme aversion to any religious object, was never able to maintain a lasting relationship, and often woke during the night screaming in tongues he could not identify. The priests involved in the case reported that they continued to feel a sinister presence following them for years after the event, and 2 of them eventually abandoned the priesthood, unable to reconcile what they had witnessed with their faith. The house where the events occurred was demolished years later, but locals still report inexplicable phenomena on the land where it once stood. Unnaturally low temperatures, the sound of children crying in the middle of the night, and the constant sensation of being watched by invisible eyes. Stay sharp, everyone. To all our amazing viewers and loyal subscribers, we know many of you watch our videos, but haven't subscribed yet. If you enjoy these stories and want to support this project, please hit subscribe, give the video a like, and share it. Now, enjoy what's coming up.
Story 2.
The Exorcism of Maurice Theriot. Maurice Theriot was a simple and hardworking farmer from rural Quebec, Canada. He knew with a haunting certainty that something sinister and malevolent lived inside him. Weeks before being found unconscious in his modest living room, his body completely covered in dried blood, with inverted crosses meticulously drawn around both eyes. He had voluntarily surrendered all his hunting weapons to the local police station, murmuring to the sheriff that he no longer trusted himself. Ed and Lorraine Warren, the most respected paranormal investigators in America, were urgently called to investigate a case that was already deeply terrifying: the small, traditionally peaceful Canadian farming community. They personally witnessed Theriot's unusual, supernatural strength, a man of average build, snapping thick nautical ropes as if they were strands of hair, bending iron bars with his bare hands, and lifting furniture that normally required 3 strong men. Household objects violently flew across rooms without physical contact. Temperatures suddenly plunged to freezing levels, and a malevolent, oppressive presence seemed to follow the experienced investigators' every move, whispering inaudible threats into the darkest hours of the investigation. The most disturbing of all was the nauseating stench of sulfur that permeated the entire property, intensifying whenever Maurice entered a trance. Neighbors reported hearing male voices shouting in unknown languages from the farm during the coldest nights, and dozens of animals in the area were found dead within kilometers of the property, always marked with strange wounds veterinarians could not explain. What truly shocked and disturbed the Warrens, even after decades of experience with supernatural cases, was uncovering the terrible truth behind the possession. Theriot had consciously and deliberately sought direct help from supernatural forces to overcome devastating psychological traumas from his past, including childhood abuse, the violent death of his parents in a car accident, and the suicide of his younger brother. He genuinely believed he was making a simple, benevolent pact with protective spirits. But instead, he had inadvertently opened a dimensional doorway, inaudibly solid, allowing ancient demonic entities to invade not as inward property. During one investigation session, Moores revealed in a semi-conscious state that he had discovered an old book buried on his land, an 18th century grimoire written in Latin and archaic French, containing detailed instructions for summoning rituals. Without fully understanding the consequences, he had followed the instructions to the letter, lighting black candles arranged in a pentagonal formation and reciting incantations that promised to free the soul from eternal suffering. What Maurice did not know was that the book had belonged to a renegade priest in the 18th century for practicing necromancy, a priest who was later burned alive on charges of witchcraft. The entity that responded to Maurice's call was not a benevolent spirit at all, but the very demon that had possessed that priest centuries earlier. During the grueling, prolonged exorcism led by Bishop Robert McKennell, of the most experienced exorcists on the East Coast, Thorio revealed, with a deep, cavernous voice that was clearly not his own, horrifying details about the dark rituals he had unknowingly performed for months. The demonic entity possessing him sadistically described how it had psychologically tortured the farmer, forcing him into acts of self-mutilation during sleepwalking episodes, and how it planned to use his body as a vessel to torment the entire rural community. The sessions stretched on for days without pause, with Morris alternating between moments of terrifying lucidity and complete possession, when his personality vanished, entirely replaced by something ancient, malevolent, and thirsty for human destruction. At the peak of the exorcism, the entity revealed its true name in a tongue scholars later identified as Enochian, the supposed language of the fallen angels. Morris levitated 10 feet above the ground. Bishop McKenna reported that it took 6 grown men to restrain Maurice, and even then, he periodically broke free, menstruating a strength that defied every known law of physics. Audio recordings from the sessions captured at least 7 different voices speaking through Maurice, each claiming to be a distinct Demaris.
Zona pere caos docemi, mibi cassa pere lusis, ol suara balata, recita e cornata. Amen.
The exorcism was eventually successful after a spiritual battle that left everyone involved physically and emotionally drained. But Morris was never again the simple man he once had been. He developed a constant paranoia about supernatural forces, was never able to sleep alone, and moved to a distant city where no one knew his story. The Warrens documented this case as one of the most complex of their careers, warning that curiosity about the occult can have irreversible consequences. For Morris, and for all who witnessed his torment, one chilling truth became clear. Once certain doors are opened, they can never be fully closed. Not everyone rests in peace. Years after the exorcism, Morris still woke every night at 3:33 a.m., the exact time when he had once performed the rituals. He could never again touch any metal object without feeling searing pain in his hands, and he developed a total aversion to darkness. The farm where it all happened was abandoned and remains empty to this day. Locals report strange lights in the dead of night, the sounds of farm machinery running with no one to operate it, and an oppressive feeling of despair that overwhelms anyone who approaches the property. The cursed grimoire was burned in a special church ceremony, but the ashes remaining in a perfect pile, untouched by any wind.
Story 3.
The Exorcism of Connecticut. The bizarre and inexplicable events in an apparently ordinary house in the historic town of Southington, Connecticut, USA, urgently caught the attention of renowned investigators Ethan and Mike Walker. The Snedeker family had moved to the property just a few months earlier. Attracted by the absurdly low rent price, unaware they were entering what would become one of the most violent and documented haunting cases in modern American history. In Connecticut, the paranormal investigating duo initiated a meticulous investigation into the tormented lives of the Snedeker family members, who were attacked daily by a sinister and apparently intelligent presence that seemed to feed on their growing terror. The house where the family had recently settled, a 19th century Victorian construction, presented increasingly extreme and violent supernatural occurrences that completely haunted the traditionally quiet neighborhood. What began as minor disturbances, doors slamming by themselves, lights flickering without reason, indistinguishable whispers during early morning hours, quickly escalated into terrifying physical manifestations. The family patriarch, Alan Snedeker, began exhibiting violent behaviors completely out of his usual character, going so far as to physically threaten his own wife and children during episodes he could not remember afterwards. The youngest child, only 6 years old, began regularly conversing with invisible friends whom they described in disturbing detail. Men dressed in black who whispered horrible things in their ears and encouraged them to hurt their siblings. The other children developed severe insomnia, refusing to sleep in their bedrooms and clustering in the living room, where they reported feeling less watched. During the first weeks, each family member lost more than 15 pounds, the result of loss of appetite and constant stress caused by the supernatural manifestations. But what truly chilled the blood of the experienced walkers was discovering the property's dark and disturbing past. The house had functioned as a funeral home for decades, where clandestine necromantic rituals were performed in the basement. During the 1920s and 1930s, the Snedekers, a hard-working and religious family, had no idea they had moved to a location where hundreds of bodies had been prepared for burial, many under questionable circumstances. Worse still, they discovered evidence that the funeral home's former owner had practiced necromancy, attempting to communicate with the dead through obscure rituals that left a permanent spiritual mark on the property, creating a kind of dimensional portal that attracted demonic entities. During basement excavations, the investigators found remains of makeshift altars with satanic symbols carved into stone walls and dark stains that laboratory tests confirmed to be decades-old human blood. Documents discovered in city archives revealed that at least 12 people had mysteriously disappeared in the region during the period when the funeral home operated, and that the original owner, Mortimer Youngblood, had been investigated by ecclesiastical authorities for practices contrary to divine nature. Most disturbing was the discovery of a diary hidden behind a false wall, where Youngblood meticulously documented his attempts to awaken the dead through communion with infernal entities. The diary's final pages, written in progressively more erratic handwriting, described success in communication and opening of the veil, suggesting he had managed to establish forces the Snedekers reported to the walkers, experiences that defy any rational understanding of reality. They heard clear and distinct voices whispering their names in the total darkness of bedrooms. Intimate conversations between deceased individuals they identified as relatives dead for decades, and were even physically violated by the spirits inhabiting the location. Violent pushes downstairs, deep scratches that appeared on their bodies during sleep, and even sexual assaults perpetrated by invisible entities, began compulsively drawing disturbing images of decomposing dead people and speaking fluently in ancient languages they had never studied. During the investigations, the walkers themselves witnessed complete spectral apparitions, photographed genuine ectoplasm emanating from the walls, and recorded electronic voice phenomena, where male voices explicitly threatened the family with extreme violence if they did not immediately abandon the property. On one of the most terrifying nights, Ethan Walker entered a trance and began channeling multiple entities simultaneously, revealing details about at least 15 different spirits trapped on the property. Some were victims of Youngblood's necromantic rituals. Others were demonic entities that had been invoked and never properly banished. During a particularly intense session, the entire family witnessed objects levitating in circular formation around the living room, while a deep, guttural voice emerged that the family now belonged to the realm of the dead. Alan Snedeker was physically lifted from the ground by an invisible force and hurled against the ceiling with such violence that it left a permanent mark in the plaster. The children were found several times sleeping in impossible positions, suspended half a meter above their beds, or contorted at angles that should have broken their bones. Carmen Snedeker, the matriarch, developed stigmata that bled spontaneously during the most intense episodes, forming satanic symbols on her arms and legs. The true case haunted not only the small town of Connecticut, but also attracted the attention of paranormal investigators from across the country, who extensively studied the supernatural events with initial skepticism that gradually gave way to genuine horror as more evidence was presented. The case became one of the most intense and well-documented demonic possessions and hauntings of modern times. The Snedeker family eventually managed to move after months of torment, but many neighbors reported continued paranormal activities on the property even after the house remains empty to this day, with several subsequent tenants reporting similar experiences and quickly abandoning the location. For the Snedekers and all who witnessed the supernatural events, a dark truth crystallized. Some places carry spiritual scars that never completely heal, and not all rest in peace. Decades after leaving the property, members of the Snedeker family still suffer from the psychological effects of the trauma. Alan developed severe agoraphobia and could never work again, living on disability benefits for post-traumatic stress disorder. The children, now adults, report recurring nightmares and an inability to remain alone in old houses. Carmen Snedeker spent years in therapy trying to process fragmented memories of supernatural abuse that her mind attempted to block. The house in Connecticut was later acquired by the city and converted into a municipal warehouse. But employees regularly report equipment moving by itself, abnormally low temperatures, and a constant sensation of being watched by invisible presences. Independent paranormal investigators who have visited the site in subsequent decades have confirmed that supernatural activity remains intense, with some managing to capture photographic evidence of complete spectral apparitions still wandering through the rooms where the Snedeker family suffered their worst torments. Do you have a scary story to share? Tell us in the comments. The best ones may appear in the next video. Subscribe for more disturbing tales and activate the notifications.